Hi, my name is Rich Bessel. I have stage 3B melanoma, and I am here for my fifth infusion.
Today's patient story. Rich sits with us to break down his melanoma story, stage 3B, advanced form of skin cancer that spread to his nearby lymph nodes. Now, in this first part of the conversation, Rich shares everything about those first symptoms, those first signs something was wrong, to the first steps to diagnosis. But first, he shares more about who he is, because as we know, we are so much more than a diagnosis.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief, but I'm the fourth of four children. I, started life out in service as a U.S. naval officer after I graduated college. I've done, a lot of different things professionally, but I'd say on the personal side of things, I entitled myself as a runner. My dad was the high school cross country coach, and I started running, I think, when I was 3 years old. And so I've more or less been running kind of throughout my life. And like in the last 10 years, I've been starting to get into marathons and stuff like that. And so yeah, it's one of those things where it's the type of thing that keeps me centered. So
I hear that it centers you. And we'll talk about that too later, because as
yeah.
we know, when we go through something like cancer, we need things to help center us, right? So,
And also, it's an outdoor sport, and my cancer is melanoma, and so there's just some kind of correlation between running and where I am in my cancer journey.
yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, and we'll definitely talk about all that. And so, as you said, Rich, you were diagnosed with melanoma, and you are going through treatment now. But let's rewind. So it's actually fairly recent that you've undergone all this, a lot in a short period of time. So bring us back to July of 2021. What were those first symptoms, as we call them?
Maybe I'll just springboard off of that, kind of sun exposure element of kind of my life and my upbringing. Like I grew up, kind of in the 70s and 80s, and we didn't have like a lot of sun protection back then, and so I don't know if like any of my like current situations related to that, but I've spent a lot of my adult life kind of outside doing long runs, and try my best with sun protection, but nobody's perfect. And I actually had a dark spot kind of right here in kind of my upper chest area that was there for a long time, um, and I really never did anything about it. It's been there for like a couple of years, but then last year around July, I noticed a similar kind of dark spot that just appeared out of nowhere. Like it seemed like within a matter of like a few weeks, this thing just like really grew and was dark and just kind of misshapen on my leg, one of my calves, my left calf. And it's like that's not really, doesn't look right. I should probably go get these two things checked out. And so that's when I did. I didn't have a dermatologist or anything, so I had to navigate the network to go find a specialist, and do I need to go through a generalist first, that kind of thing, and was able to kind of quickly find an appointment, maybe about 3 weeks after I decided I need to go see a dermatologist.
You end up choosing a dermatologist through the system. And I think you had said the priority for you was, well, just who can see me the quickest, right?
Absolutely. I kind of figured time was of the essence because I was concerned at how quickly this thing had shown up and was growing. And not knowing a ton about cancer or melanoma, I just, knew something was not right, not exactly. And I knew time was probably of the essence.
Can you describe? So you had said it was a suspicious mole on your left calf. When you say it was sudden, like it wasn't there one day, and then like, well, how could you describe that growth and how fast?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of these things where I wasn't like paying attention to, that part of my leg, every day, but I can tell you within, 4 to 6 weeks, this thing wasn't there. And then it was there, and it was protruding like out of the skin. It was dark, and it just, wow, that wasn't there a month ago. And so it was like really rapid.
Did it cross your mind ever that this could seriously be cancerous?
It did. But honestly, I guess I had the stigma about melanoma that it wasn't that serious. Like it was just, kind of on the skin. And I just, heard through, secondarily, people in my life that had melanoma. They just go to the dermatologist, get it cut off, they put a band-aid on it, and there it is. That was my literal understanding at the beginning of this journey.
So even at worst case scenario, you're like, well, this can be handled. They'll just take it off and we'll be all good, right? Um,
Exactly.
okay. And so can you describe when you did see the dermatologist, he or she does this shave biopsy. What is that like, that procedure? And did they tell you anything else about what the next steps were?
Yeah. So I think in association with my symptoms, right? I had a couple dark spots on my skin. The dermatologist, I think probably through just normal standard practice was like, we're just going to do a full body exam and just make sure maybe there's other ones that are on there that you're not seeing yet. And so she had me do a full body exam, just like examining all the surface area of my skin, including like my scalp, every little corner, just to be thorough. And then she did, obviously identify the two spots that I had come in for. And she's like, look, this one looks the one on your chest looks like an age spot, but we'll take it off and we'll biopsy it just to be safe. The one on your leg looks suspicious. We're gonna remove that as well. And that procedure, wasn't that bad. It's just like a little bit of a local anesthetic, just kind of a couple pinpricks, and they're like, "Can you feel it? Okay." And then I wasn't looking at it, but I think once it was numb, they just kind of, in the plane of the skin, just took it off and made it flush on both sides.
And then did she say, okay, now we're probably going to get results at this time, and until then?
Yes. So, setting the expectation, it's like these things take maybe 5 business days. So I was expecting to, hear about a week later, not knowing exactly when I would hear back and in what form I would hear back. I guess I probably should have asked now, but I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is one of those interesting things. We're not thinking about it in the moment, right? Did she indicate at all anything else, or did you ask? Do you wish you had asked anything about, well, if it does come back like this, or did you like that it was sort of minimal in terms of the information?
Yes and no, Steph. I honestly, looking back, I wish I would have asked more. But again, I had that kind of preconception of it's likely to come back not so bad, and even if it does, I don't really know what the path is that I'm on now. So it's like I don't know if you call it ignorance is bliss, but I was definitely like ignorant going in. Um, and knowing what I know now, I probably would have probed a little bit more as to like what to expect and what the kind of decision tree would look like, if things are positive or negative and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and so just so you'd be in a better spot if it were to come back as a positive diagnosis to know what to do then, right?
Exactly.
Okay, that's good to know. And so it was about a week later, you got a phone call. Can you describe that to us?
Oh my gosh, I'll never forget this because, like I said, in my profession, I'm a designer, but I'm a design leader, and I was having, a scheduled offsite with my team, and just I guess there's no good time to get a call like this, but it was in the middle of a working session, and I knew it was a doctor's call because I could kind of recognize the phone number, but I couldn't pick up at the time. And then I called back, and then obviously the doctor was busy, and then like a little bit of phone tag, but ended up kind of getting my dermatologist live later that afternoon. Um, and I knew like I wanted to be by myself and just kind of be prepared for whatever it was that she was going to share. Um, and so she told me they got the biopsy results back. It tested positive for melanoma. And so that was kind of the first decision tree and the first like, oh my gosh moment. I actually have a pit in my stomach, like reliving that moment. I'm reliving it right now. But like writing down with a piece of paper, like jotting down everything and trying to ask the questions in the moment. But I honestly wasn't necessarily prepared for that conversation. I didn't like have a script or anything. I was like, okay, just like, what are the next steps? And she's like, look, there's certain parts of this biopsy that are concerning in terms of like the depth of the melanoma, meaning like how deep it's gone in the skin. I forget the exact term, but like the rate at which it grew, which I could visibly see, but they could see in the biopsy like the cellular growth. And there were a couple of things that were really good about it. Like it wasn't ulcerated, meaning it wasn't exposed. And like that would have been a bad factor. And so it's kind of like some good news, some bad news about it. Which is like at the end of the day, this is concerning enough where we need to, I'm recommending that you go talk to a surgeon to go to the next stage, which is going to involve some surgery around that site, as well as like another test of your lymph system. And so more or less I jotted that down and kind of took a pause, and I didn't really have time to deal with it in the moment because I needed to be social with my team. And so I kind of had 24 hours to just put it aside for a second before I could deal with it.
You describing the pit in your stomach and then having to be like, all right, well, I'm gonna have to shelve this for 24 hours while I put on like this face of, all right, I'm the leader here and we're gonna lead this offsite and we're gonna do this.
Yeah, I mean, everybody there would have just totally been understanding of like, I gotta go. I've got some news I have to deal with, but that's not who I am. I think it's just like one of those things where I try to put everybody around me before me. I don't know if it was the right thing, but that's just what I did in the moment.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's what was natural to you. So in that way, it was right for you in that
Yeah.
moment. And it's just, it's striking too. I mean, this was like, last year, but you're describing that you can feel it right now, just that feeling of when she was talking to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's less than a year ago, and I just like reliving it, like just the seriousness and the weight of somebody telling you you have cancer, right? That's something you never forget, and like never forget, but also probably never stop feeling when you relive that moment. My first phone call was to my sister, who happens to be a doctor. And so that was kind of like my primary source of, okay, can you unpack what this means? And even then, I was unprepared because my sister was asking me a lot of questions that I just didn't have a document in front of me. I was in the car. I was, I guess, looking for more of like an immediate conversation of just like, a sense of like, how serious does she think this is? Before kind of getting into the nuts and bolts of it all. But yeah, she's like, look, I need to see that biopsy report and just like really dig in, so I can kind of help you a little bit further. And so it was kind of somewhat settling, somewhat unsettling, and that drive back. And I think the whole time in between, um, you know, at this moment and like when I started to like really understand what surgery was going to be, what that was all about, and what could potentially happen afterwards.
Right, which could be a lot to unpack, obviously. I
Yeah.
I want to rewind just a little bit because Rich, I also got diagnosed over the phone, and I think it's an interesting question of, you have people who get called back into the office and they have a feeling it's not great either. I mean, is there any sort of perspective you can share about A, the whole phone call diagnosis thing, and B, any other sort of guidance you might have for physicians in that position?
Yeah, I think there's probably like a half step in between like the taking of the biopsy and the actual like result delivery. And it's all just around like expectation setting. I think of like what are the possibilities that can come back for you so that you can mentally, I don't know, at least that's for me. It would have been just kind of nice to calibrate, okay, what are the three or four things that could happen in this conversation so I like know the spectrum of good news, bad news that I could potentially get in this call. What I would say, I appreciate the fact that they just don't put the results on like the platform, and so you like consume them by yourself with no person or no professional there to help provide the context behind it. So I think the in-person thing is the positive side. I think if it's phone call, if it's in the office, I think you want a human being there that's a professional to help address like your immediate, at least rational concerns.
I think that's great insight. And I've heard this from other people in different forms, but really it's about communication, essentially. And so then at that appointment with this general surgeon, what did he or she explain to you?
So basically, he walked through what the surgery was all about, right? Really good context of, okay, we have two components here. One is that shave biopsy. What we're going to have to do is take a larger portion of the area around that site out to make sure that like, all the cancer is removed from that area. It's going to be pretty big. and just setting the expectation of what that's going to be like afterwards, and like the healing process and all that. And then part two was what they call a sentinel node biopsy, which is basically the whatever lymph node cluster that's closest to the melanoma site. What they're going to do is test that, and they're going to be a little bit smart about it. They're going to use some radioactive material that they inject in the original melanoma site the day before, and then the surgery day they also apply a dye into that area, so they have a visual and radioactive identification of which particular lymph node would be the most likely place where cancer would have traveled to and metastasized. And so he explained all of that and what to expect. He kind of glazed over. I asked, "Is this general anesthesia?" I think it is, but like that was maybe something that would have been a headline that I just reaffirmed. And then the other part of recovery was I needed to go also talk to a plastic surgeon after this to talk about how they were going to repair my wound site, because on the leg it's different like skin, and therefore they can't like kind of mold it together. Like they needed to do a skin graft, and so the plastic surgeon needed to explain what my options were in terms of skin graft as part of recovery.
So there was a lot of information that was unloaded onto you that day. I know time was of the essence, Rich, and so perhaps it was like, let's just get ready for this. Did a second opinion cross your mind in terms of, or was it pretty straightforward that surgery is the way, and you were like, the surgeon seems to know what he's doing?
So, this is where I'm lucky to have my sister, because she was doing a lot of like research on her side, and it's pretty cut and dry, no pun intended there, in terms of yes, if there's cancer on the skin, if it's has these types of indicators, a wide excision surgery is definitely recommended. The lymph node biopsy is standard procedure, so this is all kind of pretty standard action. So I was able to kind of get her opinion, and like her, using her network, I feel like I probably had 5 opinions coming into this, so I was pretty confident. Plus also she could kind of look up the surgeon and see if he was, a good surgeon or not. So again, I was pretty lucky from that perspective.
And so peace of mind, exactly.
Yeah.
And so is it fair to say then you didn't have a stage yet? I mean, they'd have to do this other biopsy and figure this out with this extra step before they could say, hey, this is exactly what you're dealing with.
Yeah. It was kind of loosely explained to me that obviously you're at least stage 1 with that positive biopsy coming back. Your lymph node biopsy will determine if you're more advanced. If your lymph node comes back, you're some form of stage 3, potentially stage 4, because stage 3 it's traveled outside of the local site to somewhere else. Stage 4 would be if it's traveled beyond the lymph nodes to other organs. And this is where I realized that melanoma was much more serious than I first thought when I started down this journey, and how really serious this cancer is.
Really serious. And actually I'm really glad you're highlighting this. You're an example of someone who had heard of these stories anecdotally. Oh, it's just this easy thing you get rid of, and then come to find it's much more involved, of course. So we're talking about stages, and we talked about this a little bit in our last call. It's scary going online and getting all the statistics. And this is like across the board with all cancers, really, because the statistics are generally outdated, or it takes time, it takes time for them to update it or whatever. So what can you tell us about your learnings from looking up these different stages?
Okay, so now I've got my second pit in my stomach that I'm reliving in this journey, honestly.
Sorry.
This is where Google is maybe not so good, because then you start Googling survival rates, and I just did not realize that, okay, if I'm just at stage 1, it's like 99% survival rate, you're like all good. And so I'm like, but then if you're stage 3, online it's about 65% survival rate. So man, that biopsy is like really important. Now I'm like a third of less chance of being alive in 5 years. and then heaven forbid if it's stage 3 and I like get, have to go get scans for stage 4, and like at least that's what I was reading online, and so the curve is just like ridiculous, and that just it puts you in a panic mode. You're like, wow, 2 months ago this was not even a thing, and now I'm in this world of I don't know what my future. I don't know. My future is so uncertain at this moment, and you're in this place where you can't know until you get some more procedures and tests, and you have to kind of follow this path and be patient, even though it's really hard to be patient.
Do you have any sort of guidance for people who are just now getting into this, into the staging part of it, in terms of, your learnings, how you were able to stay patient, and B, just how you look at the numbers maybe a little bit differently too than when you first saw the Google numbers?
Yes, and so I know we'll talk about this a little later in the conversation in regards to like my treatment, but my advice is if you're listening to this, the numbers that are online are much lower than what like probably your particular situation is going to be, just given um, whatever, there's other factors in there of just like what access you have to healthcare, the treatments that have been in place that even I'm personally going through are totally changing the game in terms of survivability, and the ability to overcome this diagnosis. So it's hard to rationally kind of program your brain to interpret numbers, but that would be my one piece of advice is be a little bit more optimistic than what you're kind of sleuthing online.
Thank you for that. I think that'll be nice for a lot of people to hear. And it's true that we hear a lot of advancements in different treatments. So it's promising.